Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the collision of food, farm and future. How many of you got to try some of the bugs over the break? Hands up if you tried any of those bugs. Did any of you get to try the ant candy? No, there was only a few of them out there. I mean, the crazy thing was, the ants were lemony and zesty and quite a bit of mint. I only found out afterwards that the flavor that you get through the ant candy has actually come from the ants themselves. There's no additional flavoring that have been put in there. And they use them for all types of meals to be able to flavor them. And there's so many different varieties out there. It's been an incredible morning. I've just been looking through the stats. We've been trending in both Sydney and Melbourne with the evokeAG hashtag, so congrats to all of you there. I really want you to ramp it up. The statistics around our addiction to mobile are overwhelming. More than 65% of us can't go more than an hour without touching our phone. I actually think that statistic's a little bit low. The other statistic that blows my mind is 75% of you in this room use your mobile while sat on the toilet. I think that's a really disturbing statistic. So if you're sat on the loo this afternoon, get out the hashtag evokeAG on your Twitter and your Instagram. And if you borrow somebody else's phone, then just remember that filthy statistic there. And it's been an incredible morning. We're going to continue this conversation on this afternoon. Our first speaker back to kick this afternoon off. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a massive rock star welcome to the stage, our Platinum Partner Elders CEO, Mr. Mark Allison.
Very, very dangerous to give me a rock star welcome for those who know my musical initiatives. So I'd like to thank you all for coming along for the afternoon session and welcome to everyone. And what a wonderful program we've had today, this morning, and now for the rest of the afternoon and for tomorrow. Now, Australian agriculture is, and always has been, innately innovative. Farmer ingenuity has been central to agricultural success since the first settlers realised their tools and methods from the Northern Hemisphere were unsuited to this dry and comparatively barren country. Some of the great innovations in the history of agriculture have occurred in the paddocks of Australian farms. These have driven the productivity gains required to succeed in one of the harshest and most variable climates in the world, as we're seeing all around Australia in the last few weeks. In the 1800s, Australian farmers invented the world's first mechanical grain harvester and the stump jump plough. In South Australia, the Shearer brothers developed tailor-made ploughs, scarifiers, harrows, strippers and grubbing machines that could succeed in Australia's unrelenting landscape. In the late 1980s and 90s, we took advantage of the additional crop protection tools with glyphosate and sulfonylurea chemistry to develop and innovate conservation tillage practices that were uniquely tailored to our agricultural and environmental systems in Western and Eastern Australia. And these were unique from the Northern Hemisphere. We've done the same with variable rate and more broadly, precision agriculture and sustainable agricultural practices. Today, farmers, horticulturalists and graziers embrace technology and work smarter to achieve the most productive and sustainable outcomes. We harvest satellite data to manage pasture growth rates. Artificial insemination and embryo transfer are now routine procedures, and virtual fencing and robotic dairies are being widely trialled. The use of GPS and auto-steer technology is also becoming the norm. So we have a rich history of value-creating innovation and recent biotechnological advances across Australia. Why then is Australian agricultural productivity growth, which is our key measure for assessing industry performance and profitability, slowly flattening? And it is flattening. Annual agricultural productivity growth estimates for grain, dairy and beef sit between 1 and 1.5% over the past 40 years. Sheep has grown just 0.2% annually. All are struggling to keep up with declining terms of trade, input costs and the impacts of more varied, hotter and drier climate. Australian wheat yields, for instance, have stagnated since 1990. Reduced rainfall, water availability, water stress and increasing maximum temperatures have reduced yield potential by 27%. While the adoption of new technology and improved practices by Australian farmers has stemmed the tide and maintained yields up to now, if current predictions are realised, wheat yields will fall from 1.74 to 1.55 tonnes per hectare by 2041. More broadly, Australian produces about 1% of world's food for 9% of the world's arable land and very, very little of the world's water. Even to retain that 1% status, Australia will need to almost double production by 2050 using the same amount of soil and water. Despite our best efforts, we are losing ground against our international competitors. Over the past 15 years, Australian agricultural exports have increased at 5.2% per annum, yet over the same period, the nominal value of global agricultural trade has been increasing at 7 to 8% per annum annually, and the Asian region, the rate of growth has exceeded 14% per annum. Clearly, this means Australia is losing market share to economies where agricultural trade is growing most rapidly and to lower cost markets such as North Africa, Argentina and Brazil. And one of the ironies, I think, of Australian life and culture is that these emerging competitors have largely been helped by Australian technology through the 70s, 80s and 90s as part of what we saw as our global responsibility to help feed the world. The National Farmers Federation has set a bold goal of 100 billion in farm gate output by 2030. This is up from 63 billion today. Despite the general fragmentation in Australian agriculture, this target is supported broadly and more specifically through Agribusiness Australia with a whole supply chain perspective. If we are to achieve this goal, more productivity and sustainable growth is essential. So what can we do about this? What can our sector's cumulative ingenuity, brainpower, appetite for knowledge sharing, led by all of you, do to ensure that we stay ahead of the competition and achieve the bold goals that we've set for this sector? Before I answer that question, let me address a couple of reasons, most of which I think are myths, or argue are myths, that are suggested as to why we can't achieve the productivity goals. Let's begin with the old chestnut. We simply can't attract necessary investment into agricultural R&D. Australian businesses in particular will not invest for the long term. Well, this is the challenge that is way overplayed. If we mount a case for investment and we create the models and structures, we'll get the funding. There are plenty of investors here today, and for good projects, investors will part with their money. Secondly, the productivity R&D gains simply aren't there anymore. We can only innovate so much to overcome the problems, the flattening productivity. For this, I completely disagree, because that was the feeling way back then when I was a research agronomist, that most of the good work had been done and significant improvements were achieved through that period. We have achieved extraordinary growth through technology, biotechnology, AI, robotics and any number of innovations that can be the next major jump in our productivity and gains in Australia. Check out Startup Alley. I'm sure a number of you have already done that, and you can see that there are multiple innovative ideas that, if managed along the chain, can be highly successful. And finally, the continued decentralisation of R&D has meant that we don't have tools to increase productivity and profitability. This is most certainly a myth. We have our rural research and development corporations played a large part in the evokeAG as we're experiencing it now. They have a highly effective levy system, the levy system which is the envy of the whole world, and they all have highly professional and focused investment strategies in place. The overarching strategy that Minister Littleproud talked about this morning hopefully will come forward with the innovation report as it's released. We have the corporates, multinationals, all focusing on increasing innovation, faster investment and investing in growth. And there's the supercharged innovators that we're seeing across the room and across this group. So the reasoning is how we can address this decline in productivity is something more fundamental in my mind. It's about working with Australian farmers to build their trust and ensuring R&D advances are relevant, practical, effective and ultimately adopted. A critical point. And we we talk about it a little in Elders as the need to chase butterflies or profitless prosperity. So focusing on practical outcomes with real value, real cost saving, real premium providing initiatives and innovation are the key. R&D cannot be ticking project milestones or producing research papers that collect dust in the bookshelf. The information needs to be in the hands of farmers, driving the practice change we all need. This is something that Elders has done for 180 years, and it's about creating value in farmers' businesses, fostering practical innovation, and cultivating productivity. We need to ask ourselves, and to me this is a key challenge for this conference, how can this technology be used on the ground? What will it achieve? Is it addressing a problem that needs solving? And with whom do we need to partner to make the innovation a reality? This significant vital link is partnerships, collaboration, connectivity, which involve the farmer. I learned this principle personally as a young Monsanto research agronomist in 1986. I worked alongside a collection of Queensland farmers who were grappling with the major hindrance of their profitability of the relatively long rainfastness period of glyphosate of 6 hours or more, and also a triazine glyphosate incompatibility issue that was occurring in tank mixes for pre-sorghum fallow spraying. In consultation with the growers of that area, we ran a trial program and rainfast simulator with farmers to develop a crystalline ammonium sulphate solution to both issues. A tailor-made solution identified by farmers and then validated by researchers. As many of you would be aware, this practice is now common around Australia and the world, and it's also reflected in many commercial glyphosate formulations that are still around today. Today, effective collaboration with farmers begins with our RDCs and their advisory, extension and farmer networks. The RDCs take the best of global research and reinvest it with local knowledge and expertise. They have an amazing network which stimulates improved productivity, sustainability and competitiveness. We at Elders understand that vital role in Australian agriculture. Clearly, we want to partner more with the RDCs, investing and augmenting R&D investments to bring benefits to our customers and to all farmers across the country. Businesses like us have day-to-day mutually beneficial and trusted relationships with farmers across Australia. We're playing an increasingly vital role in connecting farmers with relevant R&D and information for the bigger benefit, and largely filling the extension networks that have all been disbanded by state governments around Australia. Elders, for instance, is currently working with AgWorld and the West Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development's PestFacts program. Our aim is to unlock the value of collaboration for WA growers and industry advisors and to ensure big data benefits the whole industry. And as a base philosophy, the Elders philosophy is very much one platform, that all competitors working with one platform and we can compete in the market. But the one platform allows a much better opportunity for economies of scale, sharing of information that will benefit all farmers. So PestFacts notifies growers and agronomists in the grain belt of WA of insect, disease and weed occurrences in real time. AgWorld's API integration platform enables farmers and 75% of Australian advisors to assess accurate, reportable farm data from across the country and the world. So what's our role? It involves the Elders WA agronomy team who are in the field every day scouting for pests. We act as the eyes and ears for our partners, automatically submitting pest and disease reports via AgWorld's API in the PestFacts service. This has increased PestFacts reports by 250% over the last 12 months, up to 2,007 reports in 2018. It's a win for our partners, certainly a win for Elders, and most importantly, a win for our growers. They now have more frequent, better and accurate data to make their decisions. Similarly, we are partnering with the UK company Digital Content Analysis Technology to commercialise our Ag Intel offering, a satellite imaging and monitoring product for broadacre farmers. Drawing on military-grade technology, the project provides timely, cost-effective business insights through the fusion and analysis of multiple sensors and data sources. Elders advisors are collaborating with DCAT and farmers from across the country to build algorithms which will actively predict frost events, yields, crop nutrient deficiencies, soil emollients and other issues. We're trialling this program with Riverland farmer Mark Hampel, who is here with us today. It allows him to look online and identify any issue rather than stumbling across it in the paddock. For insect attacks or nutritional deficiencies, time is everything. And we're still exploring how to best implement the system on Mark's property, but we're getting there. The key aim, ensuring we're effectively managing or preempting issues before they occur. My final case study involves a client on the Yorke Peninsula in South Australia. An innovative progressive grower, he works with us to trial variable rate cropping systems across his property. And this case study has been included for a key reason, because it's not a successful case study. And that's key to understand the wins and the losses. We mapped his acreage and together applied best practice across his farming system, varying seed, nitrogen and phosphorus rates, great variable technology with innovation in action. In this case, the results were mixed. In poor performing soils, the yields did not deliver for the phosphorus applied. We were over fertilising, but then inputs reduced to match the yield. The yield simply fell away for the rest. On the high performing soils, more inputs did not mean more yield. The yields were maintained but not improved. In this case, best practice innovation wasn't adding up. We went back to the old system, one rate for the entire paddock system. This seemingly retrograde step made sense for the farming operation and improved yields. So a key message of theory versus practice, and I think many in the room are aware of this. We're now working with the client to understand why and looking at new ways to extend the productivity gains he needs. But an absolutely critical message. In the end, effective innovation must make money, or save time. So innovation for the sake of innovation is meaningless in a world where our productivity is flattened. Let me wrap up by saying Elders is proud to be a partner of evokeAG. It's a vital conference in cultivating the innovation and productivity growth of our farmers, and this industry needs it so badly. So a wonderful initiative, and I think it will get better and better over the years. We're looking forward to collaborating with the researchers, innovators, RDCs and industry participants here. Just as importantly, we're looking forward to connecting with you and the many farmers who we've personally invited to the conference, and all the other farmers at the conference. You are central to the whole system, clearly. Our guests will be accompanied by elder staff and industry participants. Their brief is simply to collaborate, learn, contribute, focusing on driving the innovation that will drive productivity growth. They will have one guiding principle. What can this idea, technology or innovation do to contribute to the bottom line of Australian farmers for now and into the future? And I'd ask you to have the same overriding rule. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mark, and great to hear also innovation being a repeated theme as we go through this afternoon. Our next young future leader is someone that also is a farmer. He's a third-generation farmer. It is his first time ever on stage to speak to an audience, so please give the biggest rock star welcome to our next speaker here, and welcome Dylan Bellchambers.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Particularly, I really like to thank Agri-Futures Australia for putting on what is this incredible event. Particularly here in this building, it's just magnificent, and I've had a great morning and a great afternoon and tomorrow to come. Look, I just want to I'm Dylan. I'm 19 years old. I'm currently entering my second year of a Bachelor of Applied Science in Agriculture and Business at the University of Tasmania in Hobart. And today I just want to briefly touch on my journey. So throughout my journey to get to where I am today, I've been fortunate to have a myriad of opportunity, and that's all been provided really by agriculture or something that's very closely associated to it. And I ask myself regularly, I'm here on this stage today and I'm involved in agriculture, and that's why I'm here. There's not enough of us. And so we are, growing up on farms, we're so lucky, and I find that's the real reason I'm here. I was fortunate to grow up here on my family farm in the northwest coast of Tasmania, and this is really, it's really built some really great skills that I have today that's enabled me to be doing the incredible things that I am. I've been fortunate you know, this is a mixed cropping and red meat production farm. I've been fortunate to work hard here, doing an endless variety of different tasks in what is Mother Nature, which can be magnificent and devastating at the same time, and all working towards the common goal, producing food and fibre for what is the 8 billion people on this planet today. But most importantly, I've done this with family. Family are the ones, you know, they shape the person you are, and I've been so fortunate to have my own family, my nearest uncle, and also my grandmother and grandparents on the farm. So it's been really, really good to work together. And they've shaped some great personality traits. You know, we've got, you know, when you work on a family farm, you get great drive, work ethic, you get great responsibility, but most importantly, you're not afraid to get in, work hard and get jobs done. And so I then asked myself, you know, I've been able to do this, and why aren't more Australians able to? And we know we have, we know we've got we're shifting towards cities, regional areas are becoming less popular. We know that we've got climate change that potentially makes agriculture look less appealing, as well as we've got the public perception of agriculture at times looks really bad. And I feel the real reason behind this is education. I look back on my journey throughout my education, and if I did not grow up on a farm, I wouldn't have the slightest clue where my clothes come from, where my food come from. I'd be just like many, many people that exist today that just buy it off the supermarket shelf. And so I feel education is what we need to do. We need to be bringing agricultural education into the part of the Australian curriculum for all people. If we've got students and everybody everywhere aware of what agriculture is, and they understand how it's produced, then they can actually provoke the thought and take the time to think about agriculture as a career directly, and understand if they do choose that pathway, you know, it might be in business or technology or engineering, but they've got that fundamental knowledge of how farms and agriculture works. So we really need to move towards an agri-educated nation to enable Australia to have a skilled, thriving agricultural workforce into the future. And, you know, we need more people, number one, in agriculture, but number two, I find the biggest thing here, we're here celebrating ag tech, which is fantastic, but one of the biggest limits I've found with it so far is that we've got experts in the respective fields of engineering and technology that have little or no knowledge of agriculture and how it fundamentally works. So that creates, you know, they're working with some great farmers that want to solve problems and in farms, but it creates a stagnation of growth and prevents us from having the rapid rate of innovation we require to move forward to be sustainable. So, I feel, my goal is to have an agri-educated nation, so we all know where our food and fibre comes from, so that we can have a skilled, thriving agricultural workforce, and that many people like myself get the opportunity to work in the most diverse, innovative and exciting industry in Australia. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dylan. Our next speaker has flown in all the way from Israel this afternoon to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Oded Shoseyov.
G'day, Chris.
No. Anybody back? Now, good. All right. So before I start, I'd like to quote the former Minister of Oil of Saudi Arabia, who once said that the Stone Age did not end for lack of stones, and the oil age is going to end long before we run out of oil. And my addition to that, for a good reason, because biomaterials are so much better. Now, we shouldn't criticize our scientists for that, that synthetic materials are not as good as biomaterials, for a simple reason. We didn't have enough time. 200 years of modern science and modern chemistry is not enough to develop really good materials, while nature had 3 billion years to develop some of the most amazing materials that we wish we had in our possession. Yet, our orthopedic surgeons continue to install glue and screw synthetic materials in our body, and I don't think that this is a great idea for a simple reason. Synthetic materials fail. Many times they fail because they're not strong enough, just like this plastic fork. But other times they fail not because they're not so strong. They may be very strong, except that their biomechanical properties do not really fit their surrounding tissues. But the real reason is actually much more fundamental. The real reason why it's not a good idea to install these synthetic materials in our body is because in nature, things are done differently. In nature, nobody takes my head and screw it into my neck, or take my skin and glue it onto my body. In nature, everything is self-assembled. Every living cell coming from a plant or an insect or a fish contains DNA, and the DNA encodes for these nanobio building blocks. Many times there are proteins, other times there are enzymes that make other things like fatty acids, polysaccharides, and the common feature of all these nanobio materials is that they don't need us. They self-assemble, they recognize each other, and self-assemble into scaffolds on which cells are proliferating to be organized into tissues. The tissues organize into organs, and together the organs, that's the organism or life. So we at the Hebrew University in Israel, about 15 years ago, decided to focus on probably the most important nanobiomaterial for us, for human beings, and that's collagen. Now, why collagen? Because the collagen accounts for about 30% of our dry weight. We have nothing more in our body except for water other than collagen. I'll give you a few examples. Our bone is about 50% collagen, 50% minerals. Skin is about 70% collagen. Tendons and ligaments, close to 100% collagen. So I always like to say that anyone who is in the business of replacement parts for human being would like to have collagen. But admittedly, even before we started our research, that was 15 years ago, on collagen, there were already on the market more than 1,000 different medical implants made of collagen. You know, simple things like dermal fillers to reduce wrinkles, augment lips, artificial meniscus, bone grafts, and even leaflets of heart valves. So you should ask me, well, you just said that there were already more than 1,000 medical implants on the market before you started the research, so why bother? Well, the reason is the source. The source of all that collagen up until recently were dead bodies. Dead pigs, dead cows, and human cadaver. So that's not a very safe source. And therefore, the FDA already in 2007 made a notice asking the companies to start and look for better and safer alternatives. So that's exactly what we did. We cloned all the 5 human genes from human that is responsible in our body to make human collagen, and by genetic engineering, introduced these 5 human genes into a single tobacco plant. So now the plant has the code to make human collagen. So the technology was matured, and today in Israel we have 25,000 square meters of greenhouses all over the country, from the upper Galilee in the middle of the country in the southern part of Israel, where the farmers receive these small tobacco plantlets from the company. They grow them for about 50 to 60 days. Then we harvest the leaves. We transport the leaves by cooling trucks to the factory where we start the process. Now, if you ever made pesto, you know how to make collagen. You just crush the leaves with some buffer in a big food processor, get the juice, concentrate the protein, then the protein is transported into clean rooms, and the purified material is identical to what we have in our body, except it was never used before, and plants, as you know, do not harbor human pathogen, so it is more safe. And from that material, we make different medical implants. We already have completed clinical trials for 2 products, already launched 2 products in Europe and Israel, and I'm going to tell you about some of them. But before that, I'd like to stress why this collagen is so much better than the tissue-extracted one. Well, tissue-extracted collagen is extracted from old, used tissue. and therefore it's partially defected. Consequently, cells that need to recognize the collagen, because that's their natural scaffold, sometimes don't recognize it as good. And therefore, the major difference is in the perfect three-dimension structure that you find with the human recombinant collagen extracted from plant than the one that is extracted from old-used tissue. And this is translated to many advantages. One is faster proliferations of cells, and we tested here different cells, compared it with a different tissue-extracted collagen, and we tested in human dermal fibroblast, endothelial cells, human epidermal cells, and in all cases, the human recombinant collagen performed so much better than the tissue extracted. In terms of immunogenicity, zero immunogenicity compared to bovine collagen, for example, that some people suffer from some allergic reaction and consequently rejection of the scaffold. And the first product we decided to develop is to the diabetic foot ulcer. So 1 minute on diabetes. So diabetes is a major disease. It affects more than 400 million people in the world. 20% out of those people, at least once in their life, will experience a diabetic foot ulcer. Now here, really depends where you live. If you're lucky enough and you live in Israel or Switzerland or probably in Australia, your chances to lose a toe or the entire foot is something like 5 to 10%. But if you live in a less privileged country, like Russia, for example, or China, you're more likely 35% chances to lose either a toe or the entire foot. So every 30 seconds, someone is losing a lower extremity in the world. More than 1 million amputations annually. So this is a product. What the doctor is doing, he is debribing the dead cells, so remove the dead cells from the wound, and then inject the human collagen that is produced in the plant. What happened now is that the live cells in the periphery of the wound, they recognize the collagen with their receptors, which is called integrins, and get a signal saying, hey guys, you're on the right spot, start to proliferate. So that's exactly what they do. They start to proliferate, they make a granulation tissue. Once the granulation tissue reaches the level of the skin, the keratinocytes recognize it and close the wound. So here's just one case that I want to demonstrate with you. Was done in Italy. On the left-hand side, you can see here, this is the back of the heel. So there's a very deep wound, goes all the way to the bone. This patient, a 64-year-old, did not respond to any treatment for 2 years. That foot typically goes to amputation. A single application of the human collagen produced in plant, this is the result. Another product we developed is an injectable collagen for tendonitis. The first indication, tennis elbow. I know tennis is very important in Australia, but normal people also suffer from tennis elbow. So what the doctor is doing is under lidocaine, so local anesthesia, injected directly into the tendon, and the results are quite fascinating. In fact, this product is now sold in Europe and in Israel by Artrex. Artrex is one of the largest sports medicine companies in the world. And they already tested it not just in tennis elbow, but also in rotator cuff, in Achilles tendon, in jumper's knee, and the results are really good. So we said, well, plants are really great, and so they can make these very complex proteins. So what is the next thing we want to do? And biologic drugs, obviously, is a good target. Now, why biologic drugs? Well, if you look back to 20 years ago, to the list of the most selling drugs in the pharmaceutical industry, there were mainly small molecules. You know, compounds like statins and Taxol, Viagra, small molecules. But in the last 10, 15 years, something really changed. And biologic drugs, which are typically large proteins, typically antibodies, push out all these most of these small molecules, and they become very, very popular. Now, for a good reason. because these biologic drugs are very specific. So they go all the way to the target, very few side effects. And that's a great advantage. Except one big problem. They're very, very expensive. I'll give you one example. Humira, which is a humanized antibody, it's a anti-TNF-alpha antibody indicated for all sorts or many sorts of inflammatory autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, sold by AbbVie for more than $16 billion annually. Huge market. In fact, that's the biggest selling drug in the world. One big problem. The problem is that the cost per patient is $35,000 US per annum. So that's a lot of money, $100 a day. The end result is that only one out of 1,000 people in the world that would like to enjoy Humira can afford it. So you should ask me, why is it so expensive? Well, many will say, because probably there is a patent. Well, there is no patent. Patents are off. So maybe no competition. Well, there is competition. In fact, in the US, Amgen, another big company, makes the biosimilar. And there are 3 other more companies in the world that makes it. Surprise, the price didn't drop significantly. In fact, no more than 15, 20%. Why is that? The reason is cost of production. Unlike small molecules that can be scaled up in chemical reactors to make it very, very cheap, biologic drugs, these proteins are produced in mammalian cell cultures. Now, these are very special cells, very delicate, grown in bioreactors, which are very expensive, in clean rooms, utilities, blah, 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 and very, very expensive media. So that makes it very expensive. So we said, okay, why produce it in this very expensive system when we have agriculture? So we cloned the 2 genes that encodes for the heavy chain on the light chain of Humira, and by genetic engineering, introduced it into a single tobacco plant. So now we can grow it at the cost of a lettuce or potato. So that sounds great, right? And the question is it enough? Unfortunately, no. Why? Because the downstream purification is also very expensive. So how is it done today in the industry? There is a very special kind of another protein, which is called protein A. This protein A is also produced by recombinant technology in bacteria or yeast, purified, then chemically bind to a very special kind of resin, filled in a big column, and then all the mixture flows through the column. The protein A has this unique ability to bind to the tail of the antibody. It binds to the Fc region, and it catches it. So once everything flows through, by changing the pH of the media, the acidity, the protein A releases the antibody, and voila, you have pure protein. So wonderful technology, except very, very expensive. 1 liter of protein A today, column, costs more than $10,000 US. And clean rooms and so on, so very expensive. So we said, okay, but that's another gene, so let's clone that as well. We made another trick. We fused genetically to the protein A cellulose binding domain. So now what happened is when you crush the plant that contains the humanized antibody genes and the CBD protein A gene, the protein A binds via the cellulose binding domain into the plant cell wall. So this is the column or the resin. It holds the antibody, and when we press it, everything flows through. You can wash it, and then you change the pH, and we partially purified it. And from that stage, all you need is a relatively small clean room to do the final finish fill of the drug. So by doing that, we actually took all the very expensive or important, I would say, the important genes from the very sophisticated manufacturing site, and by genetic engineering, introduced these genes into a single tobacco plant in a greenhouse. So now we can grow humanized antibody in the greenhouse in tobacco. So another company was established called BioBetter in Israel, and our target is Humira for 70 cents a day, no $100 a day. We've been able to cut the cost of production by 2 orders of magnitude. Now, 70 cents a day is not a lot of money. Even a farmer in India, which makes maybe $8 a day and suffers from rheumatoid arthritis or from Crohn, he can afford 70 cents. He doesn't need the government for that. But I'm sure you have here in the audience some people that understand better than me in economics, and you would say, hey, you're crazy. You just cannibalized a $16 billion market. Well, not exactly. Because indeed, by cutting the cost of production, the price by 2 orders of magnitude, in a way, we converted $16 billion to $160 million. But we now have 3 orders of magnitude more patients. So in fact, we converted $16 billion to $160 billion. So my dream is really to take this technology all over the world. We already signed an agreement with the Russian pharmaceutical companies to take it to Russia, and hopefully in 2 years from now, it will be already after clinical trials in the market. And hopefully, we can do it also here in Australia. Trees. Trees are also very interesting. Sequoia trees always attracted my imagination because they are huge. They carry hundreds of tons for hundreds of years in cold weather, hot weather, UV light. And in fact, I'm not familiar with any plastic chair that can survive such harsh conditions. Yet if you ask yourself, how come that this tree is so strong, is so resilient? So if you look by high-resolution electron microscopy into the wood, you find out that it's actually made of these nanofibers at about 100 nanometer in length and about 5 nanometer in width, extremely, extremely strong, yet it's made of sugar. Well, not exactly the same sugar we drink in our tea. It's a homopolymer of glucose called cellulose, but these cellulose polymers are organized in a highly crystalline fashion to give this very, very, very strong material. In fact, on a weight basis, it's about 10 times stronger than steel, and yet it's made of sugar, and it's renewable. So analysts all over the world in the last 10, 12 years say that this material, nanocellulose, is probably going to be one of the most important nanomaterials for the entire industry. And they're not really talking about only construction or making chairs, but actually everything. Transportation, air and space, medicine, sport, even food. And I'll show you. But here's the problem. Say 7 years ago, you wanted to buy half a ton of nanocellulose to make a boat, for example. You could Google, you could eBay, you can even Alibaba. Couldn't find it. I mean, you would find thousands of scientific papers, like, scientists like myself and others in the world saying, hey, this is a great material. So, but no commercial source. So there was only a few grams or milligrams in different people in different labs. So we decided together with some of our partners in Europe, in Sweden, Italy, Germany, and the UK, to establish a consortium and to look and develop for a technology that can be scaled up for production of industrial production of nanocellulose. So the first thing we were looking for is a source of raw material. Obviously, we didn't want to cut sequoia trees. There is no reason, because cellulose is everywhere. And we found one very good source, and that's the sludge of the recycled paper industry. Now, why is it a good source? Well, first of all, because we have a lot of that. Europe alone produced about 11 million tons of that sludge annually. And just to give you a feel of how much material that, it's a mountain sitting, it's about 3 kilometer high mountain sitting on a soccer field. And we build it in Europe for like every year. Americans build one, China probably 3 or 4. So for everybody, it's an environmental problem. For us, it's a great source of raw material. So the technology was developed. So the technology was developed. A company was established called Melodia. Melodia have in Israel a pilot plant. We also established the first industrial site in Sweden with our partner, which is Holman. Holman is one of the largest forestry pulp and paper companies in Europe. Recently also joined us another company, Klabin, from Brazil, also another forestry and pulp and paper company. And now we can produce a lot of nanocellulose. In fact, the site in Sweden can produce up to 70 tons per annum. That's a lot of nanocellulose. So what can you do with that? A lot of things. But one of the interesting features of nanocellulose is the fact that once you put it in water, above about 2.5% or 3%, all of a sudden, this material makes something which is called liquid crystals. Now, these liquid crystals, when you apply them on any surface, and it can be plastic or concrete or wood, whatever, once the water evaporates, it self-assembles into an extremely strong and transparent material. Now, this material is so strong, in its tensile strength is twice as strong as epoxy resin. So remember, there is no covalent bond, so it's only hydrogen bonding, van der Waals interactions. Simply the fact that these nanofibers are really well organized, one next to the other, makes this wonderful strength. Another application that we tested for those is to simply coat cotton yarn. You know, the same that my shirt is made of. And by adding only 1% to the weight of the cotton yarn, we've been able to increase the toughness by 500%, which means that now I can make the same shirt with 1/5 of material or make Superman's shirt. Another interesting application taken up in Israel by another company called Valentis is for the food packaging. One interesting feature of that material is that it's an excellent oxygen barrier. So it can easily replace aluminum foil, for example. But in addition to that, by adding some other nanoparticles, such as, in this case, on the left or the top, zinc oxide nanoparticles, we can selectively block UV light. So in the old days, that's how we used to pack our materials, with tin. Heavy, expensive. We moved to flexible packaging. Great invention, except very polluting. In the future, I believe, we'll be able to coat the individual food servings, including even the cornflakes and the almonds, and it will be individually protected and then simply stored in a cardboard box. Another interesting area where nanocellulose can be implemented is in food 4D printing. Now, I know many of you will wonder, what is the fourth dimension? But let me explain to you in a second. But first, why do we need to print food to begin with? So let's start with the problem. The big problem of the world today is really the animal farming. Animal farming today it takes about 30% of all land, about 25% of all good water that we have on Earth. So obviously, it's not sustainable. We have to do something about it. There are market needs. The market needs are natural ingredients, organic, no toxins, low carbohydrates, increasing number of vegetarians and vegans, and of course, flexitarians, which are ready to eat if it's good enough, and it really feels like meat. They're ready to eat a veggie burger, and tomorrow maybe veggie steak. Increase in food allergens, celiac, lactose intolerance, and of course, personalized food. Everybody would like to be able to personalize their food. So the industry start to respond to that. Two good examples are Beyond Food and Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, I'm sorry, and Impossible Foods in the US that made these veggie burgers. So that's great, except that if you don't like that particular veggie burger, you don't really have an alternative. So personalization is a great thing and can be enabled by 3D printing. And the companies start to respond to that. Foodini, for example, now print pizza. The companies are printing chocolate. Well, chocolate is great, but it's not real food, right? And, of course, some pasta. But then you take the pasta and you have to cook it. So we decided to take it to the next step and use nanocellulose as a great binder, because nanocellulose, as you could see before, has the ability to self-assemble. So we demonstrated here just a pure cellulose, nanocellulose printing. So we took an STL file of butterscotch candy and printed it. On the left-hand side, it's only 3% nanocellulose. So when, in fact, I printed water. So this is printing water at room temperature on the left. Now, with so much water, it feels like gel. But once you remove the water, it self-assembles and it feels more like fibrous. In fact, if you take all the water, it is as strong as a bone. So by now taking all these materials, you can now mix them together, and with the design of a new printer that has the ability not just to print the mixtures of the fat and the nanocellulose and the protein and the nanocellulose, we can now cook it. So we have a special head that enables us to determine the three-dimensional space if we want to bake, fry, or grill. So by doing that, we are now starting to get the fourth dimension, which is the gastronomic, because it's no longer only a steak which is crispy or burger which is crispy on the outside. It can be also crispy in the inside. In fact, we can print the French fries inside. So this is going to save a lot of money and can do a lot of good things to the industry, particularly because of the fact that all the ingredients can preserve at room temperature. So we don't need the cooling chain. So the last example I want to share with you is insects. Now, wonders didn't stop in the plant kingdom. In fact, any kingdom gave us some wonderful things. And I'm being attracted to this insect, the cat fleas, for a long time for a simple reason. Cat fleas are amazing because they can jump as high as 200 times their height. This is the equivalent of a person standing in the middle of Manhattan in a single jump, go to the top of the Empire State Building. And you should ask yourself, how can he does it? And this is so amazing. It turns out the cat fleas developed this special protein which is called resilin. Resilin, in simple words, is the best rubber on earth. You can stretch it, you can squish it, and it doesn't lose almost any energy to the environment by heat or friction. And so what the cat fleas does, he makes his jumping pad from that, store the energy, and when he needs, release it, booms, and brings back all the energy. So many people would like to have resilin. Well, one option is to catch cat fleas. Not a good one. Why? Cat fleas are jumpy, so it's difficult to catch. And even if you caught few, you don't have enough material. But in fact, you don't need to do that. You need to catch only one. And now all you have to do is extract the DNA and clone it in a less jumpy organism. So that's exactly what we did. We cloned the gene into plant. So now we can produce a lot of that. The question is, so can it really change the properties of materials? So this is a short movie. On the right-hand side, you can see nanocellulose, just nanocellulose foam in water. You can see it has only plastic behavior. It doesn't jump back. On the left-hand side, it's exactly the same foam, but now with resilin. Look what happened. You see, can go back, and you can do it again and again and again. So this is a beautiful question. What can we do with that? Lots of things. We are now working with On. On is a Swiss company that would like to make sport shoes for athletes that would help to have better performance. And there are many other applications. And I would really now hope that I was able to convince you that we are on the verge of the plant age. Because we can produce in plants almost everything. Not just the materials that were produced by plants. We can make collagen, we can make resilin, we can make almost everything that nature gave us. And using now these modern technologies, we can store these nanomaterials in cartridges and start doing 3D printing of even a heart. Now, this heart is not going to be as good as we can get from a donor. It will be better because we are going to use better materials. I'm sure that at that point, some of you think that I need to be hospitalized, right? And, well, we are not there yet, I admit. I think we will be there one day. But I can tell you that about 2 months ago, we signed already an agreement with United Therapeutics, which is a very large US pharmaceutical company, and with 3D Systems, the largest 3D printing company in the world. Using our collagen, which was metac related, so to enable it to be used as a bio ink in 3D printers, we are all engaged now in a printing of human lung. Now, first in man is 2021, so this is really not so, this is not science fiction. This is going to happen very, very soon. And I would like to wrap my talk by quoting a very smart guy who once said, and this guy was Pavlov, Professor Pavlov, who said that if you want a new idea, you should open an old book. And my addition to that is that the book was actually written. It was written over 3 billion years of evolution by nature. And the text is the DNA of life. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. All we have to do is read this text and start our progress from there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Oded. That was truly fantastic. And our next speaker now is going to come on and have a chat with us around dispelling some of the myths around agriculture. He's 22 years old. He's got a huge number of awards that he's got so far, and he's going to dispel some of the myths that our metro part of our world have with agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, it's his first time ever on a stage, again talking to an audience. Please give a huge welcome for James Bidstrup.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That has got to be the warmest welcome a West Coast Eagles supporter has got in Melbourne for a while, I think. My name's James Bidstrup. Today I'd like to discuss the regional metro information gap with you, including the challenges and opportunities that it presents. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to evokeAG for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak on something I'm so passionate about, and evokeAG is an amazing forum to do so. So, before we delve into my presentation, I'd like to give you a quick background on myself because I think it's important to the key messages of the presentation. Currently, I'm an agronomist on the southeast coast of Western Australia, a position I've taken after graduating with a Bachelor of Agricultural Science from University of Western Australia. I'm a staunch supporter for agriculture and I have keen interests in both the grains and livestock industries. However, before any of this, I was in fact a city slicker. Now, this is a title that I despise and a label I would never use myself. However, it is very important to remember where we've all come from. And so, considering that I'm not from a traditional farming background, I'm very lucky to have entered the industry during which a time that it's undergoing a boom fueled by exciting new research, uptake of modern management practices, continuous advancements in machinery and genetics, as well as a growing global demand for Australian produce. And yet, despite this agricultural renaissance we've been seeing, the perception of agriculture within the society is still stuck firmly in the past with views that simply don't do our industry justice. And these perceptions are very important because it affects the people entering our industry, it affects society's views of our industry, and it affects the growth and development of agriculture. I think that the regional metro information gap is probably best summed up by a poll from the National Farmers Federation taken in November of 2018, in which that stated that 83% of Australians would describe their connection to agriculture as distant or non-existent, with 52% of people between the ages of 18 to 29 saying that they felt uninformed about agriculture and disconnected from farming, and scarily, 23% of Generation Y, a generation I'm a member of, by the way, simply did not care about how their food and fibre was produced in this country. Agriculture in Australia has been built by the hard work and determination and selfless nature of our farmers. As well as this, I think they were also visionary. And what I would like to suggest today is a massive campaign to overhaul the public perception of agriculture, specifically targeting this group of younger people from metropolitan backgrounds. And you know, the first thing that I would say to these people is, it's that often when I hear about this group, they're targeting work which is meaningful, flexible, and satisfying. There's a lot of people in this room today. I challenge every one of you to find a career that fits this criteria like a career in agriculture does. So what can we do about this challenge? Well, agriculture is blessed with many generous companies and organisations who represent the industry's interests, and I would like to see these people more active in providing training and education for people in metropolitan areas who may not have access to these services otherwise. However, as well as this, action can and must be taken by individuals, activists, and leaders, including speaking up for agriculture to dispel myths and hearsay, as well as other things like volunteering and even simple things like purchasing goods from retailers who give farmers a fair go. In summary, agriculture is undergoing a boom, and though we face challenges, the time is now for these negative stereotypes to come crashing down and for the information gap between regional and metro Australia to be bridged so that our industry can continue to develop and grow. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much, James. So our next session here is one of our interactive sessions. So if you haven't downloaded the evokeAG app, then download it now. Grab your phone, open the app, and go to the interactive sessions icon. You'll select this session and click on the Ask and start firing away any of your questions. And then once Spencer, who's our next speaker, has finished his session, then I'll collect those questions, see which ones are the ones that resonate the strongest, and then we'll put those to Spencer and he can ask those. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Spencer Maughan.
Okay, I'll try not to put that where I'm going to kick it over. Great. Fantastic to be here. I must say, it's better to be here now. The last time I was here, I was taking a vector calculus exam for University of Melbourne during my undergrad, so it's been a while.
So quick.
And that actually leads me, I guess, more into a small anecdote just about how happy I am to be back here and talking to you all. After I finished my PhD here in Melbourne, I went to Cambridge in the UK, and I had a great experience there. I went to Jesus College, and at that time, the head of Jesus College was a guy named Geoffrey Harcourt, who's an Australian post-Keynesian economist. And it was for mainly Australians. There were some Kiwis too, and it was quite a big sort of event. And he opened with us all in the pre-drinks and said, look, like you all, when I first came, off the train from London up to Cambridge, looked at all the buildings, I thought exactly the same thing. Not as good as Melbourne. And I definitely feel that way about so many places. So it's great to be back home. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where ag and food is going from our point of view at Finisterre Ventures. So this is meant to click forward. No? I'm not sure. Okay. There we go. So this is us. Me and my partner, Ara Makukatai, who's also here, sitting back in the middle there, co-founded Finisterre's AgTech Venture Fund. It's about $120 million fund that's focused on food and ag. And we've been one of the early movers in the sector. We're a West Coast-based fund, so we're in California. I'm in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley. Arama heads the Southern California office, which is in San Diego. And then we actually have a real global outlook. So we have people in New Zealand, in Europe, in Israel, because really not just technology, but food and agriculture is really a global market. And to really understand it, I think you have to be on the ground in all the areas, I think, of what we would call excellence. We've been backing technology companies since 2006 in the space, and that goes all the way from sort of new farming systems that are reinventing just how food is grown, like Plenty, an indoor farming company that's raised $300 million, all the way through new ways to manage crops, new ways to create technology-driven inputs, straight through to risk sort of management and fintech, ultimately to consumer-facing food companies like Farmer's Fridge, a really innovative Chicago-based company that we recently invested in that's scaling local and high-quality food. But one of the things as investors that we do often is pattern match. And so I thought I'd just digress for a moment and talk about a sort of, I guess, a framework or a pattern that we see that sort of personally is significant to me. So if we look at US retail, in 1872, a company in Chicago was formed called Montgomery Ward. I don't expect many of you to know that name, but this company was set up on the back of technology, and their technology was the mail order catalog. And this company pioneered that and had latched on to a consumer change that really there was huge demand for city goods in rural areas where a lot of Americans lived, because obviously the farm economy employed many more people than it does today, and they didn't have access to those goods. And so it quickly ramped. It was, for a time, at the turn of the century, the largest retailer in America. And culturally significant, just like an Amazon today is. They, in one of their Christmas catalogs, they brought out the character Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and that poem. So everyone sort of has some connection to this company and just its weight, I think, in the market. I guess since email didn't exist back then, 20 years later, a fast follower came along, Sears, which also exploited mail order catalogs. It did it in a slightly different way in terms of geographies that it was running after, but really ramped quickly along with Montgomery Ward. So these two companies ended up flowing through about 2.5% of US GDP. And that's over twice what the makeup of ag receipts are in the US today. So really significant players in terms of how things were sold and just the economic impact. But one thing that happened at the turn of sort of World War II, coming out of that, there was a flight to the suburbs in the US, which is when my grandfather, John Andrew Barr, took over Montgomery Ward's, and they were in a fierce battle with Sears. Obviously, they were the 1 and 2 retailers in the US. And you can see here on this graph, the green being the flight to the suburbs in terms of the percent of population in the suburbs. And Montgomery Ward had completely missed this. The previous head of the company, a guy named Sewell Avery, really believed that cities were the only place to do business, and also was very scared of another depression, and so was hoarding capital. And they really didn't make that investment and follow that change in consumer trend, right, and demographics. So Sears became by far the dominant retailer in the US. This is just Sears Tower in Chicago, if anyone's been to Chicago and seen the skyline. It's, I think, now called the Willis Tower. The Sears Tower was the tallest building in the world, constructed in the late 70s, and sort of ironically, it fell away in the late sort of 90s, right when you saw a huge uptick in America using the internet. It's just a nice coincidence. But they were by far the dominant one, and of course, they have now missed the digital revolution, Sears, and last year filed for bankruptcy in the US. So it's pretty amazing that there's these two stores in the States were so good at exploiting a consumer change or a consumer preference change, but then missed one big change that enabled a set of consumers and really lost big. And obviously today, Amazon is really the winner here. So what does this say about food and ag, and why bring this up? And I think one point I'd make up front is that ag tech investing and food tech investing is no different than any other venture sector. So there's nothing unique, and I think you have to look for the same sorts of things, whether you're starting a company or investing in a company. And one of those things that's needed from a venture point of view is a dynamic market that's changing, that's attached obviously to a large market. And what we've seen, at least in the US, and I think it's mirrored in lots of different places around the world, is that this last mile especially, so the right-hand side here, this sort of messy eye chart, is that the consumer is really changing and has changed a lot in the US, driven by, I think, millennials, but others too. And really, this in a way mirrors those time periods we talked about. So, post-World War II, the really dominant view of quality food was food that was safe and consistent. And so processed food and the big CPG companies really took off. And this persisted for a long time, and you got things like spam out of it. But this has changed over the last decade, and high quality food, at least in the US now, is becoming more and more connected with local, traceable, highly nutritious, fresh food. And that really has completely altered the connection of consumers and food with the existing supply chain. And it's really quite disruptive. So in the last 5 years, the top 5 CPG companies in the States have lost almost $20 billion in market share. So it really is happening quite quickly. And when you think about just that aggregate number, that's a big market in itself, and it's still just really nascent and beginning. But what that does mean is that there is a huge pull-through in terms of the effect that has all the way down the chain. And there is sort of what we believe a very real re-engineering of that value chain. So we'll still have all the buckets that you sort of see here, all the way from suppliers and producers through the supply chain, but they will look very different, and we believe they'll be exploiting very different technologies to take out a lot of the touch points and connect consumers much more closely to their food. So there we go. So some of the drivers that we think that underwrite this rapid transformation are cost points of technology. And I think a number of people have pointed these out, so I don't want to sort of labour it, but here's just one example between sort of DNA sequencing and compute, power and cost. So essentially these things are, at least on a per base pair point of view, free now. I mean, they are so cheap that all of a sudden when you get to that sort of level, and you pair it then with other technologies on top of it, so AI and data science innovation, along with things like CRISPR and synthetic biology, you have a loop here that is really strongly positive, driving not just greater efficiency in terms of capital expense to create new products, but also just innovation in general and new ideas that you couldn't do or direct to places before. And one of those, is very, very much so in the food and ag sector, because when you're looking at commodity pricing, especially now in a low commodity price cycle, you really do need access, if you're a startup especially, to technologies that are cheap and can be pushed out towards those sorts of endpoints, right? Because otherwise the margin really just isn't there if the technology itself is super expensive. So I think sitting at the center, which is probably the second part of our thesis beyond just a changing value chain, is that data really rules them all. So it sits in the middle, and it's really the engine we see that drives a whole lot of this innovation cycle. So whether you're looking at synthetic biology and natural products for new chemicals or new food ingredients, some of which were sort of touched on just a couple of talks back, or breeding technologies that are computationally dense, looking at whole genome structures. Or then, of course, what we're more familiar with in the ag tech sector around digital software services, sensors, and then fintech, when we're looking at sort of AI-based risk underwriting. All of these produce or rely upon specific data sets that are quite large, and they're getting larger all the time. And when you think about agriculture and its products that move around the globe, the data sets end up becoming sort of exponentially large. And as we move towards a world where there's better and better access to that data, that then provides new insights and new capabilities to then steer all of these sort of, point solution-based technologies that have come online, whether that's a CRISPR genome editing or whether it's a brand new approach to encrypting data and sifting through different features within that data. And so we think that, with data in the middle, it can drive a number of outcomes across the chain. And we've worked a lot to try to define what we think are the biggest buckets of opportunity across those. So I won't read them out, but they're sort of in this grid, which we've also put in a couple of different formats. We used this with PitchBook, which is owned by Morningstar, one of the big market research firms for the finance industry, to try to map out what we think, again, the trends are across those, as well as where the opportunities are. And so we put out the Ag Tech Investing Report each year with PitchBook, and that's open access, so by all means you can find it on PitchBook's side or ours. But I think what it reinforces is that there's big momentum around all of the sort of, buckets that we pulled out originally. And so we're reasonably confident that what we're seeing is real and to some extent correlated with a couple of the drivers that I've sort of spelled out. So that's, I guess, the first part here. I just wanted to provide a framework for how we look at the drivers of the opportunity in ag and food tech, and then sort of spell out more specifically what's underwriting that. In the next little bit here, after I have a sip, I wanted to discuss just some of the data around investment. So that's sort of, at the end of the day, the bread and butter of our industry in venture capital. And I think that there's some remarkable sort of trends that we're seeing within that. And then beyond that, comparing that to Australia also, we linked up with the University of Sydney and the United States Study Centre there to do the first Ag Tech Investing Report for Australia, based largely on how we structured things in the PitchBook data set so that we could sort of compare. So I thought we could go through that to just look at what the investment sort of landscape looks like, and then at the end move sort of more towards what we feel is a pretty strong opportunity set in terms of where the market is going, at least to us. And we might, so I'll jump into the PitchBook data. So some of you might have seen this earlier. My partner, Arima, showed some of this data in a breakout session on venture capital. What's obviously clear here is that there is real momentum, which I think, in some ways is sort of, a senseless point to make since we have over 1,000 delegates here. But at the end of the day, sort of money is where the rubber meets the road often. And so it's important to see that, the hype is backed up by real quantitative analysis. And so, since 2012, there's been over $7 billion that's been deployed. This is every year that we've been looking at this has been a record year from VC, and we're seeing both more groups come into the sector, as well as more geographies come online in terms of venture capital groups. Each year, our firm hosts a deal day, which is in Silicon Valley, and we invite sort of all active ag and food investors to sort of an invite-only event to talk about not just the investment horizon, but also trying to flag deals or trends that are particularly attractive at that point. And we've noticed that from what began of sort of 30 or so groups is well over 100 now independent investment groups that are deploying capital. So we've had a lot of strength. Some of it's been driven historically, certainly in these early years, by notable exits, which spanned the entire range of traditional venture capital investment areas. So life science, Athenex was acquired by Crop Science. It's a GM trait company. AgriQuest was a new chemical company based on biologic, sort of more environmentally friendly, so to speak, chemicals being produced that Bayer also bought. Climate Corporation, I think everyone heard about this one, that Monsanto bought for $1 billion. Which was, I guess, the first big digital play that was acquired. And then Granular and Blue River most recently, spanning again digital services as well as automation in field. So all of these sort of outcomes have certainly spurred more, but I think now, in our view at least, the engine is self-propagating in the sense that it isn't just dependent on these legacy ones. I think people understand some of the drivers that are pushing a much bigger pipeline of deal flow, and that consumer trend, I think, is enticing many more investors that there is a very, very real market that is linked to significant change. So if we look more specifically at the stage of deal, so typically venture capital has a couple of buckets in terms of where a company is in its life of financing. So there's a seed stage, which is very, very early. Usually that's followed by the first institutional capital, like our fund, which is a Series A, and then generally follows the alphabet as you go along and the company grows, with sort of Series C, D, that sort of thing as being growth stage when you're mostly providing capital to support sales. And what we've seen in the sector is that it started out with not that much capital going towards later stage deals, and that the deals were not particularly large. And we've seen big changes in both of those things over the last few years, so that the average size of deal is creeping up. And you have many more later stage deals, and some really notable ones, which I think people have probably heard of in the press, where multiple hundreds of millions have been invested into ag tech companies. So this is sort of remarkable in the sense that it shows a growing maturity of the venture cycle also, which opens up then the opportunity for very different investors to come into the landscape. So what we're seeing in Silicon Valley is that more and more of the growth funds are now looking, as well as endowments and other providers of large sort of capital checks, infusions into companies are coming online and looking at the sector. So I think that bodes well, certainly for areas where maybe that capital isn't as available, certainly being aware of that change in trend and the cycle where you have companies actually going up the growth curve and where that capital is can be helpful. And if we break it down then by area of where the money is going, it's been split. This is the global view dominated by the US really here. It's sort of gone into lots of different areas, although there is a very large proportion that's gone to crop protection, so new chemicals, pesticides, things like that, as well as plant science. So there has still been a big commitment from risk capital to what is pretty deep technology and life science. There's also, of course, been a lot in sensors and digital. But I think it's remarkable that there is a lot in crop protection. That's actually, for the last few years, been the number one leader in terms of dollars. This, I thought we could compare to the Australian market. So if we look now at what we found in Australia, the market is very different. So it seems to be much earlier. And one of the really, really clear things is that there is a growing amount of capital going into the super early stage, the sort of seed stage deals. And we haven't seen a growth in institutional capital or certainly later growth stage capital. And so I'm not sure exactly what that means. We speculate in the report, but it certainly seems to be a little bit less sophisticated in the sense of the amount of institutional capital out there. And that could be either from a market point of view of understanding, or it just simply might be due to the capital that's available. But it's very different than the global trend. The other point, and I won't go through all of this, but there's a lot less money being put into the space. So if you look at, the US on an ag tech investment per capita, it's about $4. That's Canada, $5.80 in the US. In Australia, it's 12 cents or something. So, when you try to normalize the data, it stands out pretty clearly that there's an underfunding in our mind, at least in Australia. And that actually is good from our point of view because we think it presents an opportunity. That affects pricing, and it means also that there's probably many more entrepreneurs and companies chasing a really limited amount of money. And so it's an interesting area, especially when you think about some of the critical infrastructure here and success around life science particularly, which is an area that is very attractive more globally to VC in agtech. And I guess this sort of spells out that point too, that if you look at where the money is flowing in Australia, it's going predominantly to digital and IoT, sort of device sensing, things like that. Which is, so on the right-hand side here, the blue dots are sort of the percentage that is going towards these different technology areas globally, and the red dots are Australia. So pretty much across everything, Australia is significantly less to a little bit less in terms of allocation, except in sort of sensors, software, IoT, where it is just disproportionately dominated compared to what you would see globally or the US. So, there is a question in our mind, is that being over-invested, right? At least from a seed point of view. Are there that many good entrepreneurs and ideas? Or maybe there's some other better opportunities, like in breeding technologies, genetics, things that Australia has typically done very, very well in. And then if we wrap up all of that investment and just think about sort of the nuts and bolts of it, is that we have to ultimately get money back to our investors, our limited partners. And the question that comes up all the time is, where are the exits? And we sort of think, again, in a pattern recognition point of view, that pharma is a pretty good example of what might be just around the corner. Pharma in about 99, 2000, had a huge amount of consolidation. That's the blue bars in this graph. And then the orange bars are actually the aggregate acquisition dollars that went towards VC-backed companies. And you can see that, phasically they're in tune with each other. And that after that consolidation settled down, there's been a huge and persistent uptick in acquisition of new technology and new products. So it was really a pivot from internal innovation to external innovation. And as you all know, within the ag sector, and even in the food sector, but remarkably in the ag sector, there's been a huge amount of consolidation that has been going on for some time, but has really picked up speed in terms of the numbers that we're seeing recently over the last few years. And so we believe that this will also have a pivot to a degree to external innovation. And I think the corporate VC world is another sort of signpost on that road, because there's been such a huge uptick in the number of ag and food companies creating venture vehicles themselves. And I think that's indicative of sort of external innovation and more open innovation. So while there haven't been a huge number of exits already in the space, we believe that this wave is coming. And it's supported, I think, by a lot of fundamentals, not just the story in pharma. I'm going to leave it probably with this slide, but the point that I guess I wanted to end on is where are we going? And I think, with our Fund 2 that is mostly invested now, where we're actually closing on a new fund, the previous fund was really focused on point solutions, companies that were attacking a very clear pain point, whether it was with a digital software service or if it was with biology. And they were trying then to scale that and be best in class in that one area. And typically what we've seen in the Valley is that, ultimately as these grow and you get more customers and you get a bigger installed base, they themselves become platform companies, as opposed to trying to build the platform from get-go. It actually builds organically. And so the question we feel on the back of this move from point solutions to what we think will be platform technology companies and a much more rapid cycle of innovation and outcome in terms of acquisition is, which of all of the many, many leading ag tech companies out there across all the different sectors will grow up here and become the next platform company, like an Oracle did, or an SAP, or Microsoft, or Uber, or Airbnb, or any of these that have that channel and the platform to be able to put on other technologies and really start to, I think, revolutionize that value chain we talked at the start in a really short time frame. So thanks. I'm going to leave it there. I think I'm over time, but I appreciate you all listening to that, and I'll be around, so by all means, come up and have a chat.
Thanks, Spencer. So I've been having a look through the questions that have been coming through the app. There was quite a bit of interest around IoT.
Yep.
IoT, Internet of Things, is a topic across all industries. How do you see in the next 5 years the impact that IoT is going to have devices, either industrial IoT or consumer IoT, in the agri-food and agri-tech sector?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key things with IoT is we think it'll really affect the supply chain side.
Yep.
So we think that there's going to be, all of the IoT devices, especially on farm, that I think really dominated the first wave.
Yep.
Have been focused on one data stream, and that could be, aerial, it could be a canopy, it could be soil, but it's one sort of data stream. I think all of that's going to start to get packaged much more closely with traceability and also taking out touch points across the supply chain. So we feel that where it's taking us is to a feasibility where you have much greater transparency across the chain,
Yep.
as well as then invigorating a whole bunch of we think, fintech plays and risk management plays that will be both enterprise software and consumer-based.
Thanks, Spencer. It's afternoon tea now. We'll catch you a little bit later on. Go and enjoy some more bugs and edible delights. Thank you very much.